Welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, today I want to make a few brief announcements. We know many of you are listening in from far away and can't attend local events or programs. That's why we provide this free webinar series. We host multiple webinars per month, so please visit our website to view the current schedule for 2017. Simply visit our website at www.johnson-center.org and click on the webinars link on the right-hand side. New webinars and events are often added, so if you are not on our email list, I encourage you to visit our website and click on the Join Our Email List link that appears on the homepage. To get instant news and events from the Johnson Center, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, as we often announce grant and scholarship opportunities, research opportunities, and special events and presentations there. And be sure to check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Johnson Center with no spaces. There you will find a library of several of our past webinars covering a wide variety of topics. For those of you who are local, be sure to check out our Back to School Bash coming up on Saturday, September 9th. This is a free, fun family event for all children ages 4 through 10. You can find more information on our Facebook and Twitter pages. And be sure to follow our colleagues at the Autism Research Institute, as they host their own webinar initiative and they share some great resources on their website and social media pages. If you would like a certificate of attendance after today's webinar, look for a follow-up email in your mailbox 1 hour after the webinar concludes, or look for the link on our YouTube channel in the webinar description. It will contain instructions on how to get your certificate. If you have questions during the live webinar, you may type them in your GoToWebinar control panel. If you are watching a recording of this webinar, you may email questions to the presenter at info@johnson-center.org. Today's webinar is presented by Wendy Richardson. Wendy has worn many hats in the many years she has worked at the Johnson Center and in our community, from direct family care to research coordination. Today, she shares some of what she has learned, highlighting the importance of community involvement in research. Please welcome Wendy Richardson.
Hi, I am presenting today, Research is Rewarding, a community commitment to making a difference for all. So why is it important to talk about this? Why should we talk about research? It's simple. Research needs participants to move medical advancements forward. What will we talk about today? We're going to talk about pediatric research, but in general terms, as there are so many different types of research studies, from studying the body to the brain and beyond. I'll cover most asked questions about pediatric research. We'll walk through a consent process for a study. We'll talk about your rights, and we'll talk about being a critical consumer of published research. Research can be daunting, and after the webinar, I hope you'll have a great sense of how to participate and what it looks like. We're all familiar with adults doing research, but many parents may not have considered the opportunities for children to contribute to research. The C.S. Mott Children's Hospital did a poll. They found that 92% of parents have never been asked to have their children participate in research. So this might be something you've never even considered. So we'll talk about why people choose to participate, the incentives to do so, and what you might expect from the process. Let's start with a basic definition of research. Research is the scientific search for knowledge, or a systematic investigation to establish new facts, solve new or existing problems, prove new ideas, or develop new theories. We will be talking about medical research and specifically studies that involve pediatric participants. Children are not little adults. The World Health Organization did a presentation about children's health and environment, and they made the point that children are not little adults. Until 500 to 600 years ago, artists in Western traditions represented children as miniaturized adults, just as we see in this 13th century icon. This illustrates the inaccuracy of thinking of children's risks simply as scaled down adult risks. Adults are not suitable for pediatric research. Since children are not little adults, there is a great need for pediatric research. Children's bodies are still developing. They may respond to drugs differently, like drug absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion may all be different from adults. Side effects from drugs or treatments may be different due to exposures occurring different developmental windows. And diseases like cancer can develop completely differently in children than they do in adults and can require different treatments. Diseases and disorders that only occur in childhood require study in children, not adults. Medications need to be researched over years. We need to understand the long-term effects of pediatric treatments. How do these treatments and medications play out over time? So again, in the CS Mott Children's Hospital National Poll, they found that 77% of parents want only FDA-approved medicines for their children. And they found that parents value the information that comes from research. However, there's a large gap between the proportion of parents who want safe medicines and the proportion who are willing to have their children participate in the medical research that would produce information about medicine safety. So that gap ultimately leaves parents with less information about medicines than they themselves want. So now we know pediatric research is important, but a small percentage of people participate. So let's look at some of the statistics on why parents have their child participate or not. Again, from the Mott Children's Hospital poll, we learned why parents would want their children to participate in research. And reasons to participate include if the risk of harm were small, so 42% of parents said that. They'd participate if the disease was being studied ran in their family. 32% believe that. 30% said if their doctor encouraged participation. 27% said if the research would help other children. And 17% said if the child received payment. Now let's look at how the parents answered reasons for children not to participate. So parents may not want their children to participate in research for several reasons. Parents were asked to indicate which reasons would lead them not to allow their children to participate in research. So 73% said there is too high of a chance for harm. 60% said, I do not want my child to be a guinea pig. 41% just thought that it's not appropriate for children to participate. 38% said they wouldn't if their child's doctor was not directly involved. And 36% if the disease did not affect my child. Now we know why pediatric research is important and why parents participate or not. So let's walk through the questions the child may have about doing a research study. I have a great video about Mia, an animated character who goes through some of the questions and issues that might be raised when a young person is invited to take part in clinical research. Remember that in this animation, Mia is doing complex research, and many studies are much more simple. Studies are even done online or may take one visit. So some of these questions wouldn't come into play for smaller, simple studies. And this is great because the script was developed by young people, ages 10 to 18, who had worked with the Nuffield Council on Bioethics, but they weren't experts in research. They were just young people.
When I first heard the words medical research with young people, I kept imagining myself as a lab rat in a maze, being forced to do experiments by crazy-head scientists. Then I met a real-life researcher, and she seemed pretty normal. I was still nervous though, and so were my mum and dad. All these questions were buzzing around my head. But she told us we could ask her anything. And she gave us some leaflets to read and some websites to look at, and they helped me understand a lot more. I learned that the point of research is to make better treatments. Researchers do this by collecting information from the types of people who use the treatments. They need to work with young people, and not just adults, because our bodies are different, and we think differently. There are thousands of different research projects. Some take a day, some take years. Some are about the body, some are about the mind. Some are with healthy people, and some are with sick people. Researchers should explain what they're doing clearly, without using scientific language that goes above our heads, or without making us feel like little kids. Research ideas are always checked out by experts first. Some research is even designed for the help of children and young people. My mum and dad were concerned about the side effects that I might experience, or pain. I was more worried that I'd have to spend all my free time in that hospital and wouldn't be able to see my friends. The researcher asked if there was anything in my life that I didn't want to be affected, so we agreed that my Saturdays would be kept free so I could see my friends. If me and my parents disagreed about whether I should do the research, it would be horrible, like being controlled inside a computer game. I know my parents want what's best for me, but I'd like them to listen to how I feel. The researchers said if we disagreed, we should talk it through with her, and they'd listen to me. They said if I was an adult, I'd be able to make the decision by myself, but till then, we'd need to do it together. I was scared that if I started the research and then didn't like it, I wouldn't be able to stop. Like a roller coaster. It starts off slow and it gets faster and faster. But she told me I could always speak to the research team if I had problems, and that I could leave at any point and no one would be angry with me. She said that after the research, they'd send me some information about the results. It was important for me to know that if I did take part, I'd find out what the research had actually done. It's a big decision, so I wrote a list with all the reasons to do it, and all the reasons not to. The main thing for me was that if the research went well, it could help lots of other young people in the future. I was still worried about not being able to see my friends so much. In the end, I talked it through with my parents and the researcher. Discussing it with them helped me make the right decision for me.
So again, this video asks questions about a complex research study investigating new treatments for Mia's illness, and it required her to commit to multiple visits. But many research studies are as simple as filling out a questionnaire online or taking your child for a brief one-time visit to a clinic or a pediatrician's office. So let's go over the important items that Mia learned about research. So she learned that she, as a child participant, could ask questions at any time. She was given leaflets and websites to learn more about the study on her own. She wondered, why do children need to do research and not just adults? And we learned earlier, because children are not little adults and bodies and brains are very different. We learned that the researcher should always explain to pediatric patients what is happening very clearly with no scientific language that the child can't understand. And at the same time, the researcher shouldn't talk to the child like she's a baby and talk down to her, but use age-appropriate language. She wondered, since her study involved treatment, would there be side effects? The researchers were careful to ask if there was anything in her life that she was afraid would be affected, and they made sure that it worked with her schedule, kept her Saturdays free. If she wanted to disagree and have her parents listen about it, they all could talk together with the researcher, so there was open communication. And what if she wanted to stop midway through? So the researchers should always make it clear that anyone can leave the study at any point, and importantly, that no one would be mad. The researchers would provide information once the study was complete, and Mia made her pro and con list of why and why not to do it, and it was important to her to help other young people in the future. So now let's talk about a few terms. One term I want to bring up right away, I refer to it a few times, is the IRB. That is the Institutional Review Board. So the IRB is the professional committee designed to review research proposals and studies, and this team is charged with protecting the rights and welfare of people involved in research. These are typically institutional-based boards, so universities, hospitals, and there can also be private IRBs. This is the team that oversees the safety of the study and protects you, the participant. So now that we know some of the questions that children have, let's walk through a study. Since we do some nutrition research, I'm going to use one of our studies as an example. And going through the consent process will answer many questions that parents usually have about their child participating in a study. So let's say your son Charlie comes home from kindergarten with a flyer in his backpack. And the flyer is about a nutrition study, and nutrition is interesting to you, so you call the number on the flyer, and you talk to a research assistant. So we'll call her Jane, and Jane will explain the study to you on the phone, or she may ask you to come into the clinic, and she'll explain the purpose of the study, the procedures, what Charlie will be asked to do, and she'll answer all of the questions that you have. And you can ask questions at any time. So if you hang up with Jane and then you have some questions and things were unclear, you can take a day or two to think about it and call back with more questions that come up. Jane explains that this study is comparing the nutrient status of children with autism to those who are typically developing. So the next step is that Jane will go over the eligibility requirements of the study with you to see if Charlie or his siblings qualify. And requirements can be different for different groups of children in the same study. For Jane's nutrition study, the criteria is male or female, and the child should be between 18 months old and 8 years old, typically developing or with an autism diagnosis. And the typically developing participant may be excluded if there is any history of genetic, psychiatric, or neurological disorders. And it looks like Charlie meets the criteria, but his baby sister's too young, so you agree to move forward with Charlie. And then you're going to ask Charlie if he wants to help other kids by having his height, weight, and arm muscle measured. And then you're going to tell him about the parts that you're going to do, which is answer some questions. And you're going to explain it to him in terms that he understands, and Charlie thinks it's a great idea. So you decide to move forward. And you move on to the consent process. So usually this consent process is done in person, but in some circumstances it can be done on the phone or online. So you and Charlie come and meet with Jane in her clinic. It'll take about 10 minutes for Jane to review the consent forms with you. And again, it's going to describe in writing the purpose of the study, the procedures of the study, your confidentiality, important contact numbers, your responsibilities as a subject, and your rights, the possible benefits, and any risks of participating in the study, and also if there's compensation. At that time, Jane will also provide you with the IRB information and the procedure to opt out of the study if you or Charlie wish to later. So you'll always have the information of the people involved if you have more questions or if you wish to stop the study. So Jane is going to give you more details on the purpose. So she says that they're comparing nutrition intake from children with autism and typically developing children, sometimes called the control group or non-ASD group. And you ask, how long is this study going to last? And this study will take about 3 years. And who's in the study? Jane needs 150 participants with autism and 150 non-autism participants. And what is expected of the participants? So you'll need to track Charlie's food intake over 3 days. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 3 days. Jane estimates it will take you about 2 to 3 hours total to log in his meals, and then also to complete 2 questionnaires about his early development. And then you ask if there's compensation. And compensation can vary from $5 to hundreds of dollars, depending on the complexity of the study. But for this study, Jane will give you a check for $20 when you're done. Jane will also go through in the consent subject responsibilities. So Jane talks about participants, you and Charlie, being willing and able to follow study directions and procedures. So for example, you need to report on food intake for Charlie, including 3 dinners. But say your job was you were a nurse at night and you weren't usually home for dinner time, so that the study might not be a good fit. But you're not a nurse and you don't work at night, so this requirement works for you. And with your interest in nutrition, this seems like a good fit. Other responsibilities as the participant and participant's parent, you're responsible for telling the staff if you have any problems. You have to ask questions as you think of them, and tell the researchers if you change your mind about staying in the study right away. So rather than just becoming unresponsive to calls or emails and having it be unclear, to be clear about continuing your participation. So you agree and you feel like you and Charlie can easily take these on, so you and Jane proceed with the consent. So here is where Jane gives you the details that Charlie will meet with a nurse and she will take his height and weight and measure his arm muscle. So that's the part that Charlie's going to do. Jane explains that Charlie's participation in the study doesn't involve any physical or emotional risk beyond that of everyday life. Since it's really just paperwork that you're doing and getting his height and weight and a measurement, there's no risk. If, like Mia, he had an illness and it was a clinical study for a new medication, there would be more risk to discuss, but this is a very simple study. Jane will also talk about the medical benefit. So in this study, Jane explains there's no medical benefit from the study since there's no interventions. It's really just information gathering. So a really important element is confidentiality. Charlie's study records will be kept private except when ordered by law. All of Charlie's records have many safety measures in place. So documents are stored behind 2 or more locked doors. So that could be file cabinets, office doors, building doors. Electronic records are always password protected. And typically a child's information is turned into a number to create an ID that's used on all forms. So Charlie's name wouldn't even be visible anywhere. Again, the IRB. So the IRB and study staff information will be provided by Jane in the event you have any questions or any complaints about the study. You'll always know who's in charge and who to reach. So once you've signed your consent forms, you're ready to participate. Jane gives you the food diary to take home and complete over the next 3 days, and you make an appointment to come back to the clinic with it complete. When you come back for your appointment, you'll turn in your food diary, and Jane will give you those 2 other questionnaires about Charlie's early development to fill out. And Charlie can play in the playroom that's right next to where you're sitting. There's never a time that you can't be with your child. And once your forms are completed, Jane will walk you both back to the nurse's station and take Charlie's height and weight and muscle measurements. And once Charlie's done, Jane will give you a check for $20 for participating. So it's pretty simple. So you may hear the term assent. Many local IRBs require written documentation of assent, and that's an agreement document for 7 to 13-year-olds used in conjunction with a parent-signed consent form. So as an example, my 3rd graders just came home with a research participation flyer in their backpacks. And a local university is doing a math test study, and we were asked to participate. So I had a consent form, just like the one we've talked about, and it included an assent form. The assent form had the same information, but it was written on a 3rd grade level, so my 8-year-olds could understand and agree and sign it. So the basic information, again, about the study, but it was written in language that was easy for them to understand. So I turned in the consent and the assent forms. Now let's learn about what it takes for professionals to conduct a research study. Knowledge. Studies are done by researchers that are knowledgeable and educated about the subject that they are researching. Many scientists collaborate with other researchers and institutions to cover a greater field of knowledge. Our nonprofit often collaborates with other universities on research. Funding. Someone must pay for research to be conducted, and there are various sources of funding, like government grants, foundations, corporations, and private individuals often fund research. They need resources to conduct a study. They need access to data. So this could look like medical charts, having access to medical charts for certain groups of people. They need people to collect samples from. This could be a one-time or repeated. It could be blood draws. It could be brain scans. They need people to collect information from. So like you did in Jane's study, questionnaires, surveys, standardized tests. They also need access to existing data. So again, kind of medical records or past histories. So how does study data get communicated once the research study is complete? Who writes the research papers? Researchers publish their results in research papers, and they're listed as the authors on the papers. Authors are typically listed in a particular order in a published research paper, depending on their field. Conventionally, the person who did the most work is listed first. In most cases, the last author is the most senior person. And there can be several authors on one paper. There can be from 1 to hundreds of authors. And here you see that in our nutrition study, Kelly Barnhill is the lead. Alan was our registered dietitian. Nate Marty is a statistician. And Dr. Laura Hewitson is head of research. Let's learn a little bit more about the components of a published paper. So every published research paper has a title that summarizes what the authors were looking at in the study. So our example was Analysis of Dietary Intake in Children with Autism Spectrum Disorder. Research study methods and materials, the who and the how and the tools. So the materials and methods portion of the published paper will provide the details about how the research was conducted. So the who was in the study and why. Ours was 18-month-old to 8-year-old females and males. Under materials, they might list the tools used to conduct the study. We used dietary intake forms, height and weight and muscle measurement. And then the type of study. So was it a case study? Was it an observational study? Was it a literature review? And the authors have a results section in the paper. This is the description of what they found in the study. So in our nutrition study, for example, it might say, the majority of participants consumed adequate calories, protein, fats, and carbohydrates. However, the majority were deficient in vitamin A and D, etc. So that will be the summarizing results. So where can you find published research? You may want to track the research that you participated in or read up on the latest research for a particular illness, maybe one that a family member has or a friend has. So let's talk about how to find the latest published research, as there are many sources to access. Let's first touch on being a critical reader and why it's important to look at where it's coming from, who wrote it, who interpreted it, and is it trustworthy? So when you're reading research, you want to be critical, you want to be informed, open-minded, skeptical, and thorough. So what does the term peer review mean? Peer review is a process that academic journals use to make sure the studies they publish represent good science. When a study is submitted to a journal to be published, the editors send the study out to other experts in the same field to get their thoughts and opinions on the quality of the work and the appropriateness of the claims, things like that. So peer review is a term that you'll see when you're being critical of the research that you're reading. And to be a critical reader of research, you want to think about the following. Who were the people in the study? What was the inclusion or exclusion criteria? If this was a replication study, were the methods consistent with the previous studies? Did they do it exactly the same way? And what was the study size? Were the results based on what happened with 2 subjects, or were there 200 subjects? Also, to be a critical reader of research, you want to think about in the discussion area of published research, that explains the findings of the study in terms that are more easily understandable for readers. But the discussion section is the one that gives the author the most flexibility. This is because the findings of a study are always open to interpretation. Authors usually present a very good argument for their conclusions about the findings of the study. It is important to bear in mind that the discussion section of an article reflects the author's own interpretation of the findings of the study. In addition to presenting their conclusions about the findings, authors should also discuss the limitations of their study. For example, was it limited by a small number of participants or to a specific setting? So now, where do you find reputable published research? Maybe the research you participated in, again, or research that you're interested in finding the latest information. One of the places to access public research is PubMed. This is an online resource, and PubMed comprises more than 27 million citations for biomedical literature from Medline, life science journals, and online books. Blogs. So something about blogs. Since no blog or website is likely to post testimonials that run counter to the point they're trying to make, they may be interpreting a published research paper with their own spin. Just something to think about. And science is so complex, it's challenging to boil it down to a soundbite or a headline for news or blogs. So again, there's interpretation. Another great place to find research is Google Scholar. This provides a simple way to broadly search for literature. You can search across many disciplines and sources. So Google Scholar has articles and books, abstracts, court opinions, academic publishers, professional societies, online repositories, universities, other websites. So it's a great source. And universities. University websites will list their published research paper on their websites. So I told you about the university math problem study that my third graders participated in. That was conducted by UT, so I'll go to their website first to look for those published results in the published research paper. Now let's talk about who might ask your children to participate. A trip to the pediatrician, or your speech or OT clinic, or your school may help local universities or clinics conduct research studies. It might happen in your classroom, outside of your classroom. Also, friends may ask you to help on behalf of a family condition. If you take a trip to the hospital, that may lead to information on current studies that are in progress that your child is eligible for. So I put this statistic up again because most parents, again, want only FDA-approved medicines for their children, and pediatric research is the way for them to get the information they want. So this is a great incentive to participate. I'm going to talk now about other incentives for people to participate. Incentives can be non-monetary, such as functions relative to your child's health and care. So if researchers are studying vitamin D and you participate, you might get a vitamin D lab test done as compensation for participating. If someone in a family gets a diagnosis, family members often feel that they can do something, that they can make a difference by participating in research. We all hope that new developments and cures will come in time to help family members, but helping to improve care for all future patients with the target condition is often fulfilling and rewarding. Many families participate in fundraising walks or runs or choose to do research as a way to show their family member that they are on their team. Many family members feel helpless, especially extended family that do not live near the family member, and they can do research locally. Can be a show of solidarity without being in the same town. And an incentive is also maybe you're part of a community. for children with Down syndrome or muscular dystrophy, and compensation for doing research with those groups may be getting newsletters that are related to care or related to services. Compensation might be, access to other parents in the community or getting webinars. And many incentives are monetary. So monetary incentives must be approved by the IRB. And the amount is wide-ranging, $5 to hundreds to thousands, depending on the amount of time you're required to participate, the complexity of testing, if you have to travel, and a host of other variables. Sometimes passes to the zoo or the children's museum near the research center are offered as compensation. And another incentive to participate, that you may save a life, that research can provide new treatments and interventions that can greatly impact lives. It takes non-affected children and affected children to make strides and discoveries in these fields, and participation may help to improve care for all future patients with the target condition. So if you've participated in research and you want to know if there's a concrete outcome, know that it may be months or years before that study is complete, before the paper is published or the new medication is created. So even if you never see the results or the published paper or which patient may have benefited from your contribution, you can know that you played a role in moving important research forward. So where can I find research to participate in? Again, chances are you've never been approached to have your child participate in research. Remember that statistic that I showed you earlier, that 92% of parents have never even been approached about research. And you don't have to wait for an invitation. You can search out opportunities. Google searches for research opportunities in your town are a great way to start. If you live near a university, there may be studies going on there. If you're a member of a large nonprofit like Autism Speaks or the National Down Syndrome Society, often have pages devoted to research studies and where to find them. And even Facebook pages for the diagnosis you're interested in may have study information, and you can find those opportunities there. You can always ask at your pediatrician's office and at your school. So I love this quote. Almost every successful person begins with two beliefs: the future can be better than the present, and I have the power to make it so. So your participation in research may find new and better ways to prevent, detect, diagnose, control, and treat illnesses in the future. So thank you for your time, and I hope that you're now armed with information for any research studies you and your children may choose to participate in. Thank you.